The envelope was thin. Too thin to carry hope. Too light to hold the weight of what it represented. Naomi Carter stood frozen in the narrow hallway of the apartment building, her fingers trembling as she stared at the official seal printed on cheap white paper. The stairwell smelled of damp concrete and old paint that had been peeling for years. Somewhere above her, a neighbor argued loudly. Somewhere below, a door slammed. Life went on around her, indifferent and relentless, but hers had just paused, suspended in a moment of terrible clarity. She didn't need to open the envelope to know what it was. She had been expecting it, dreading it, feeling it approach like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. A name was typed in cold, black letters that seemed to mock her with their bureaucratic precision. Apartment number. Date. Final notice. Legal language that transformed her home into property, her family into case numbers, her desperation into data. The eviction notice felt heavier than any debt collector's knock, heavier than all the bills piled on her kitchen table, heavier than the exhaustion that lived permanently in her bones. A crushing heaviness settled in her chest, squeezing the air from her lungs. She leaned against the peeling wall, breathing slowly, carefully, afraid that if she let the panic take control, she would shatter into pieces too small to put back together. Inside the apartment, her 3 boys waited, blissfully unaware that their entire world was about to collapse. Marcus, 12, pretending not to listen but hearing everything through the thin door. Ely, 8, trying so hard to be brave. And Jonah, only 5, too young to understand why silence had become so dangerous. Naomi folded the paper carefully, as if respecting it might somehow soften the blow. She didn't cry. Not yet. Not here in this hallway where neighbors might see. She had learned that tears were expensive. They cost time, energy, and control. 3 things she couldn't afford to waste. When she finally opened the apartment door, everything looked different. The space seemed smaller. The same worn couch with the broken spring. The same chipped table they ate dinner at every night. The same thin blankets that never quite kept them warm enough. But now, every object felt temporary, fragile, already half gone, like borrowed air that would soon be reclaimed. "Mom," Eli asked softly, his voice small and uncertain, reading the tension in her body even though she tried to hide it. Naomi forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Everything's fine," she said. The lie tasted familiar, bitter on her tongue, but necessary. Mothers lied to protect their children. It was one of the unwritten rules of survival. But later that night, when the boys finally slept together in the same bed for warmth, their thin bodies curled around each other, Naomi sat alone at the kitchen table with the eviction notice spread open before her like a court verdict. 30 days to find money she didn't have, answers no one was giving, and a future that kept shrinking no matter how hard she fought. Baltimore's rain tapped against the window with a steady, unforgiving rhythm. Each drop a tiny hammer blow against glass and hope alike, and Naomi realized something terrifying. This wasn't just about losing an apartment. It was about losing the last place where her children still felt safe, the last walls that held their memories, the last door she could lock against the world. The next morning arrived too quickly, dragging Naomi from a restless sleep into harsh reality. She began packing, not because she was ready, not because she'd found a solution, but because waiting felt even worse than moving forward. Even if it was toward disaster, every box was a memory she wasn't done living, a chapter torn from a book that was still being written. Marcus helped silently, his jaw tight with emotion he couldn't show. He folded clothes with the grim seriousness of someone far too young to carry such a heavy burden, forced by circumstances he couldn't control. His hands moved like a machine. Shirts, pants, socks, each item a piece of their life that was breaking apart. Eli asked questions Naomi didn't know how to answer. Where will we go? Will I have to change schools again? Can we take everything? His voice carried a hope she couldn't bear to crush, but couldn't honestly feed either. Jonah, her youngest, was still in that magical world of early childhood. He kept putting toys back exactly where they belonged, absolutely convinced that if everything just stayed in its proper place, nothing bad could actually happen. Naomi watched them and felt guilt crawl up her spine. burrowing under her skin and making a nest in her chest. This wasn't how motherhood was supposed to feel. She was supposed to protect them, to shield them from exactly this kind of trauma. Instead, she was packing their childhoods into cardboard boxes with no destination address. She started calling numbers scribbled on old papers, coffee-stained notes she'd collected over months of desperate planning, housing assistance programs, emergency shelters, churches that claimed to help families in crisis. Every single call led to the same dead ends, voicemails that were never returned, waiting lists that stretched for months, polite voices offering sympathy but no solutions, compassion but no beds, prayers but no keys. By noon, the apartment had started to echo in a way it never had before. The empty corners spoke louder than words, their silence like an accusation. The bare walls looked like indictments, exposing the bones of their temporary existence. Outside, a city worker in an orange vest stapled another eviction notice on a neighbor's door 3 apartments down. Naomi turned away quickly, unable to watch. The message was devastatingly clear. She wasn't alone in her suffering, and that somehow made it feel worse. Not better. Misery might love company, but company doesn't pay the rent. That night, as if the universe wanted to twist the knife even deeper, the power flickered ominously. The boys huddled close as the lights dimmed and surged, shadows stretching across the walls like reaching hands, like dark fingers grasping for them. Naomi held them tightly, her heart pounding against her ribs. She could feel their small bodies pressed against hers, fragile, trusting, completely dependent on her. She whispered promises she wasn't sure she could keep, words that tasted like hope but felt like lies. "I've got you," she said firmly, trying to make her voice carry a certainty she just didn't feel. "I always will. No matter what happens, we stay together." But when sleep finally came hours later, it was thin and restless, full of anxious, half-formed dreams. Naomi dreamed of doors closing, one after another, in an endless hallway, of voices calling her name and then forgetting it mid-sentence. Her very identity dissolved. She dreamed of her children standing behind her, holding hands, as she faced something massive and dark that she couldn't fight, couldn't even see clearly. When she woke up in the pre-dawn darkness, disoriented and exhausted, the eviction notice was still there on the kitchen table, unmoved by her fear, unimpressed by her hope, indifferent to her desperation. And Naomi understood with brutal clarity. This wasn't a warning anymore. It was a countdown, and the clock was running out. 3 days before the deadline, just 72 hours separating her family from homelessness, Naomi sat on the floor, surrounded by boxers she couldn't afford to move and couldn't bear to abandon. The boys were asleep nearby, on the mattress, wrapped in every blanket they owned, layered against the cold and the uncertainty. They were mercifully unaware of how close they were to sleeping somewhere else. Somewhere colder, louder, less kind, more dangerous. Somewhere that would take pieces of their childhood they could never get back. Naomi stared at her phone. The cracked screen glowed faintly in the darkness. No new messages. No missed calls. No last-minute miracles. Silence had become her loudest enemy, more oppressive than any threat, more crushing than any insult. She thought about her husband, really let herself think about him for the first time in months, how he disappeared so quietly, slipping away like smoke, leaving chaos behind him like a slow-burning fire that just kept spreading. The debts he'd racked up, the threats he'd provoked, the fear he'd planted, and now, the final consequence of his selfishness. Eviction. He had abandoned them, but his choices still lived here, still suffocated them, still determined their future. The city doesn't care about reasons or explanations. The system doesn't care about effort or good intentions. Paper matters more than pain. Signatures mean more than suffering. Naomi stood up slowly, her joints aching from sitting so long on the hard floor, and walked to the window. Baltimore stretched out endlessly, LCD vast landscape of streetlights, glowing like distant stars she could never reach, destinations that existed in a universe parallel to hers, but forever separated by an invisible barrier called poverty. Somewhere out there, in those lit windows, people slept without fear of tomorrow, without counting down the days, without wondering which night would be their last under their own roof. Somewhere out there, doors would stay closed, not forced open by sheriffs carrying court orders. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass. her breath fogging the window, and allowed herself one rare moment of complete honesty. "I'm scared," she whispered to her reflection. To the city, to God or fate or whoever might be listening. "I don't know what to do. I don't know how to fix this." But then, as if pulled by a magnetic force, she looked back at her sons. 3 small lives depending entirely on her breath, her decisions, her strength, her refusal to surrender. And something shifted deep inside her chest. The fear didn't just disappear. That would have been too easy. To flee. Too much like the lies people tell about courage. But it moveth. It stepped aside just enough to let something else through. Something harder. Something that had been forged in these exact fires. Determination. Naomi Carter folded the eviction notice one last time and placed it carefully in her jacket pocket, right over her heart. Not as a surrender to defeat, but as proof of battle. Proof of what she had already survived. Proof of what she had endured when others would have broken. Proof of what she would never, ever let define her or limit her or destroy her children's futures. Because this wasn't the end of her story, no matter what the official letterhead claimed. This wasn't the final chapter, despite what the deadline suggested. This was the moment before transformation. The silence before the roar. The darkness before she learned to make her own light. This was the moment before Naomi Carter rose from the ashes and showed Baltimore exactly what a mother's love could survive. If this story moved you, if you see yourself or someone you love in Naomi's struggle, hit that like button.